I've been cleaning up my Steam backlog recently, and it led to a playthrough of Star Wars Force Unleashed, a combo-based hack-and-slash game focused on power fantasy and using big force powers. You play as Darth Vader's secret apprentice, enacting his will across the universe. The story is silly, but mostly in a cheesy, fun way, although it takes a significant turn for the worse towards the end. The gameplay is a lot of fun, and utterly annihilating entire armies of stormtroopers remained a peak experience all the way through to the end. But it could also be horrifically clunky at times, and controlling your force powers was absolutely wretched. When I look back on my time with Force Unleashed, I feel like it was a really enjoyable game that I would happily replay in a few years, but with some very real flaws that definitely bogged down the experience. To me, that's the definition of a 7 out of 10 game, and so that's the score that I gave to it on my backlogged review. I never played Force Unleashed when I was a kid, so I was curious about the reception for the game around release. And it seems like 7 out of 10 is not just my thought, it's the overwhelming consensus from both critics and fans. Back in 2008 and even now, reviewers and fans alike were of the opinion that the game is good fun but had some very noticeable flaws. I'm sure there are people out there who either hate Force Unleashed or think it's an underrated masterpiece, but by and large the consensus seems to be that Star Wars Force Unleashed is a 7 out of 10. Pretty good with some issues. This was decided in 2008, and it seems like it's a non-controversial statement to make. A few weeks later, I boot up Avowed for the first time. Putting all my cards on the table, I am a pretty big fan of Obsidian. I haven't loved every game they've released, but I do like the Pillars of Eternity games. So Avowed is something that's been on my radar, and I've put about 30 hours into it so far. Here are my cliff notes on the experience. I think the combat is actually really fun, and it's a nice development on what we got in Skyrim. I hope Bethesda's paying attention for when Elder Scrolls 6 comes along. The story is relatively interesting, and I think the characters are pretty well written. I've enjoyed a few plot twists here and there, and there's been a couple of memorable moments. On the other hand, although I enjoy the story, I think it would be pretty hard to enjoy by somebody who isn't already familiar with the universe that these games take place in. I appreciate the addition of the on-screen dictionary feature, but the Pillars universe has always struggled with the extreme number of settings-related nouns that the players have to remember for the story to make sense, and it is just as rough here as in the other games. I also think the RPG features are woefully underdeveloped, and the RPG aspect doesn't feel that distinct from the skill trees that you'd get in an open-world FPS like Far Cry. This is very much an action-adventure game first, stat-heavy RPG second. Maybe the back half of the game will cause me to lean more towards one side or the other, but if you were to ask me for a rating for Avowed as it stands, I'd put it at about a 7 out of 10. Avowed is pretty fun. It has some very real issues, some that can be fixed with patches, and others that are core to the design philosophy, but it's also provided me with a pretty enjoyable time. Avowed isn't rocking my world, and I doubt it'll have any sort of lasting impact on me after I roll the credits, but I won't have regretted my time with it at all, and I might even play it again a decade from now. It's a good game with a lot of problems, just like Force Unleashed. 7 out of 10. Yet for some reason, Avowed isn't getting the same treatment as Force Unleashed. If you go to any social media site to look at opinions on Avowed, it becomes strikingly clear that you are not allowed to feel slightly positive about it. You either have to strictly love or hate it. And this isn't only with Avowed. This sort of belief that a game is either incredible or garbage with no in-between seems to be fairly dominant. It truly seems like the 7 out of 10 game is dead, and it wasn't a natural death. We killed it. Now don't get me wrong, I don't live under a rock. I am fully aware that Avowed is in a unique position because it's tied up in a bunch of culture war nonsense. There are a number of people who have a vested interest in Avowed's success or failure because it's being used as a battleground to fight a proxy war in the cultural battle that's playing out across the media landscape right now. Avowed is being hyperanalyzed because its success or failure can be used as ammunition for people in the argument against whether or not being woke automatically guarantees the ruination of a game. I'm not ignorant to this context, but I also think that this attitude towards middling video games is becoming a constant across the industry and affecting plenty of games that don't have this political baggage. And I do have other examples on offer, but Avowed is sort of the perfect example for this, even setting aside all of this stupid cultural baggage. go boot up your favorite social media site, whether it's TikTok, Reddit, or here on YouTube, and look up Avowed. Go to any video that's vaguely positive towards the game and look at the comments. You'll see an absolute laundry list of comments about both Avowed and the people talking about it. This YouTuber is a paid shill, or they only liked the game because they got a review key. Avowed is too much like Skyrim, but also Avowed isn't enough like Skyrim. It doesn't matter what part of the game is being talked about, there are going to be people in the comments complaining. I found a girl on TikTok laughing at an NPC joke after she threw a grenade at an ancient ruin, and somebody complained that there was a visible prompt to blow up the ruin. Too much hand-holding, they said. A prompt that can be turned off, by the way. The vast majority of the people making these complaints haven't even played Avowed. But you know what game they have played? Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, and by God, they are going to tell you about it. In basically every single review, video, or discussion post to ever exist about Avowed, there are legions of these slighted gamers disgusted at the very idea that people could possibly like a game they don't, comparing Avowed to Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, in a desperate bid to prove it's the better game. Avowed's combat looks weightless. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 has way better first-person combat. The writing seems cheesy and bad. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 will hit you like a truck. The characters? Ugly and boring. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 has way better characters. On and on and on and on. And like, why does any of this matter? Look, I actually agree with these people. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is better than Avowed. It is an absurdly special game. And while I haven't quite beat it yet, unless the end of the game is drastically bad, I feel pretty comfortable giving it my own personal 10 out of 10 rating. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is a masterpiece, and it absolutely is better than Avowed, at least in my opinion. But again, why does that matter? The fact that Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is fantastic doesn't diminish the fun I'm having with Avowed, and this logic doesn't make a lick of sense if you apply it to literally anything else. Akira is the greatest anime film I've ever seen, and I don't think any other anime film will ever surpass it for me. Does that mean I should just never watch another anime film because I could just be rewatching Akira instead? Should I have avoided watching Dune 2 because I knew I probably wouldn't like it as much as The Empire Strikes Back? Imagine if back when you were enjoying Force Unleashed as a kid, some dumbass waltzed up to you and said, "Why are you even bothering with this game? Devil May Cry has way better combos and a better story to boot." Like, yeah, obviously I think most of us are probably going to agree that Devil May Cry is better than Force Unleashed, but it sounds pretty silly to suggest that someone should avoid playing Force Unleashed entirely because this other game does combos better, doesn't it? Like, I know this is an absolutely wild suggestion, but people can actually play both Avowed and Kingdom Come 2. Playing Avowed doesn't actually magically delist Kingdom Come 2 Deliverance from the store page. Crazy times we live in. This kind of stuff has always existed on the fringes, like with comic book nerds who will make fun of you for enjoying a current comic run because some obscure run from the 70s did the storyline better, but that kind of stuff's really easy to ignore. When it becomes impossible to discuss Avowed at all without having to wade through this kind of stuff, that's the point where it becomes overbearing. And this sort of stuff is starting to become everywhere. No game is simply allowed to be pretty good anymore. It's either an absolute masterpiece or it's total garbage, and nothing in between is acceptable. Look at all the discourse around Final Fantasy XVI. Like, to me, that is the perfect definition of a 7 out of 10 game. But that's not the case. People either ride it to the ends of the earth like it's a misunderstood masterpiece, or treat it like it's a complete piece of garbage that shouldn't even be looked at. And I don't think it's either of those things, but that doesn't seem to be an acceptable opinion. This all or nothing attitude became painfully clear with the discourse around the Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Look, I clickbaited a bit because I don't actually think Tears of the Kingdom is a 7 out of 10. I think it's closer to an 8 or an 8.5. I really enjoyed it. But the fact is that a legion of people will see me include Tears of the Kingdom and 7 out of 10 in the same title, and they will flock to my comments section to yell at me without ever watching the video. Others will have stuck around and are going to still yell at me for an 8.5 either because it's too low or it's too high. And that's as much what I'm talking about as everything with Avowed. Tears of the Kingdom doesn't have the same culture war nonsense around it as Avowed, but the reaction to anybody who gives it like a middling high rating is the exact same. On one hand, you're going to have a whole boatload of people having borderline emotional reactions to Tears of the Kingdom, being given anything lower than a 9, who are going to accuse the reviewer of being haters that are just trying to follow the Tears of the Kingdom hate trend for views or some other nonsense, over an 8 out of 10 I might add. And on the other hand, you have a faction that believes Tears of the Kingdom is total garbage and are disgusted at the very notion of anybody liking it enough to give it an 8. Tears of the Kingdom is ruining the franchise, they say, with a garbage story, stupid mechanics, and horrible design. And if you enjoy the game at all, you're blinded by your love for Nintendo. And I just want to reiterate, it's fine if you feel strongly one way or the other. If you really, really love Tears of the Kingdom or you really, really hate it, that's totally fine. As long as you're confident in your opinion and seeing other people who have a different opinion doesn't upset you to the point where you need to argue with them about it. Like, as someone who doesn't feel super strongly either way, there's just no winning here. Either I'm a nostalgia-blinded baby who likes anything that Nintendo gives me, or I'm a trend-riding hater who only hates the game for views. All for the same score. I'll never forget the absolute fury over the Jimquisition review of Breath of the Wild, which is kind of the epitome of what we're talking about here. 7 out of 10 is a good score. Look, the point I'm getting at is that in the modern social media age, you are not allowed to have lukewarm opinions about things. Either Eternals is the worst movie you've ever watched, or it's a misunderstood masterpiece people are just too dumb to understand. You either have to love Avowed, Tears of the Kingdom, or you have to consider them crimes against humanity. You think the game is just pretty good? Well, you're a disgusting fence sitter pandering to both sides of the aisle, or you're too scared to share your real opinion. Like, no dude, my real opinion is that these games are 7s or 8s out of 10. Avowed has fun combat, great exploration, and decent writing, with a story that's good if you're already a fan of the universe. But it can be tough to parse if you aren't, and the RPG mechanics are pretty underwhelming. Avowed is a game that has a lot of flaws, but it's still pretty enjoyable. 7 out of 10 seems like the perfect score. Tears of the Kingdom is better. I'd go as far as to say I think it's really good. Ultra Hand and Fuse are fantastic new mechanics. I enjoy a good handful of the set-piece story moments, and I thought exploring the depths was really neat, but the overall story was a bit of a mess, the Sky Realm really sucked, and the world isn't changed nearly as much as I would have liked. Tears of the Kingdom had some very real problems, but the positives heavily outweighed the negatives for me, hence an 8 out of 10. That isn't me trying to pander to both sides of the aisle or sit on the fence on these two games. That doesn't even make sense since a 7 or 8 out of 10 is way closer to 10 than it is to 0. But these days, giving a game a 7 out of 10 is basically the same as 1 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 depending on who's getting mad at you. It's enough to make anybody mad. But why is it like this? Why has the 7 out of 10 game been killed? And why is discourse so all or nothing now? Why is it fine to call Force Unleashed a 7 out of 10 in 2008, but nowadays Astrobot either has to be the greatest platformer of the generation or a baby kids game? Well, to some degree, I think it's always been like this. To some degree, I don't even think this is entirely our fault. Humans have kind of been doing this since they gained the cognitive ability to critique another person's work. Socrates thought every word coming out the mouth of a sophist was complete garbage that you should ignore. Meanwhile, Diogenes thought that spending a day playing in the garbage was probably more valuable than listening to anything that Socrates had to say. That's obviously hyperbole, right? Socrates was obviously a valuable thinker, regardless of what Diogenes thought, and I'm sure sophist writing isn't entirely without value. We've just been so prone to all or nothing judgments since the beginning of time. I do think it was greatly enhanced by the introduction of the 24-hour news cycle though. I'm about to go on a bit of a tangent here, but I promise it loops back to video games. The 24-hour news cycle was brought on slowly, but exacerbated by a number of, shall we say, high-profile events in the 2000s. News outlets went from curating news down to fit limited time slots to needing to fill an exorbitant amount of time with anything and everything. Obviously, the idea of sensationalizing news is certainly not an invention of the 2000s, but a desperate bid to fill the 24-hour news cycle leads to news outlets pruning stories for all they're worth and then some. Every story is stretched to its limits and analyzed from every conceivable angle, no matter how irreverent. Every quote from every politician is analyzed word for word and posted out of context in a bid to manufacture controversy and create more news to fill airtime with. Obama wore a tan suit? Trump has a McDonald's obsession? Time to talk about it for hours and hours. Content is king. It is brutally obvious how the 24-hour news cycle has infected millennials and Gen Zers and affected the way they engage in society. Nowhere is this more clear than TikTok, where an offhanded joke or comment from one creator will give another creator 15 videos worth of content to rant about. There is an entire industrial complex around smaller creators orbiting the pages of bigger creators, watching every video with a magnifying glass to look for quotes that can be taken out of context, keeping an eye out for anything that can be stitched or replied to. On TikTok, you gotta be constant and you gotta be consistent, and just like news reporters with the 24-hour news cycle, these people will take anything to fill up the airtime. And you can see how the exact same all or nothing attitude people treat video games with develops in their relationship with general news in these TikTok dramas. Take the former US Senator Jeff Jackson, for example. He was an early example of politicians moving to TikTok, and he was one of the few that seemed to really get the platform in all its eccentricities. He made videos breaking down US political procedures in really straightforward ways that everybody can understand, and he did it in a way that showed he really understood what made TikTok special. As a result, he was probably the most beloved politician on the platform, and he was hailed as an example of engagement with youth-centered platforms that all future politicians should emulate. But then, Jeff Jackson made a boo-boo, a big one, and he voted for the TikTok ban. He gave some bad excuses about how he did it because he knew the app would never get banned actually, and it was for security concerns, but it was an atrocious decision by TikTok's darling, no matter how you looked at it. Now, all the good things Jeff has ever done are thrown out the window and he is a pariah. Every video he's ever made since is filled with comments of people who hate him, and he will never have quite the same impact he used to. If we were to rate him, Jeff Jackson was once a 10 out of 10 content creator, and he's now a 0 out of 10. The guy made a stupid decision, let's be clear, but the continued backlash he gets is kind of insane. The fact he made a really big boo-boo shouldn't completely override the good he's done in informing people about complicated political procedures and making people more politically engaged entirely. If we were to give Jeff Jackson a rating, I would probably give him a 6 or 7 out of 10. He did a lot of good and he has some real big flaws, just like Avowed, but he's not allowed to be a 7 out of 10. He's either the greatest politician to ever go on the platform or he's complete garbage. But his demise was almost guaranteed by the legion of people who saw his downfall as another topic to mine for content in a quest to fill the gluttonous demand of the 24-hour news cycle. This is so obvious with games like Avowed and the response that it's gotten. Content creators who haven't played the game see that some people have issues with certain aspects of it, and then decide that Avowed hate is something that can be absolutely mined for content and fill their pages up with it. You're now then pushed to pick a side. Either you join the people nitpicking every aspect of the game for criticism, or you dedicate yourself to fighting that misinformation so hard that you become overly sensitive to valid criticisms of Avowed. Or take Tears of the Kingdom. Producer Eiji Aonuma makes a somewhat tasteless quote about how people who want to return to the old Zelda formula might be nostalgia blind. That's content. Time to make a half dozen videos and write a million articles about how he hates all old Zelda fans. Meanwhile, these stupid videos and articles prompt Tears of the Kingdom lovers to wage war and defend both the game and Aonuma with such ferocity that they ignore the fact that the comment is worth a little criticism. All this anger is promoted by sensationalism stoked by the constant need for more content. It's a nasty, nasty cycle, and one that I don't foresee us ever escaping. Another factor, I think, is the devaluation of the 7 out of 10 as a score. It's almost like worldwide inflation has affected video game scores too. As time passes, the actual value of a score has decreased. In reality, a 7 out of 10 means that the piece of media being evaluated got nearly 75% of everything right and only a quarter of the things wrong. Something getting 3/4 of the things it tries right is admirable, and 7 out of 10 is a good score. It means, or at least it should mean, that you really liked a game, you just felt like there was also room for improvement. But nowadays, a 7 out of 10 basically means what a 5 out of 10 used to mean. People see a 7 out of 10 and assume the game sucks. Hell, I don't even think that a 5 out of 10 should necessarily mean that a game sucks. It's still got half of the things it tried right. Video games media gets to take the lion's share of the blame for this one, especially certain outlets who have absolutely abused the 6 or 7 out of 10 and give basically every game to ever come out aside from legitimate masterpieces a 6 or 7. These websites do the dance of trying to review games while keeping their advertisers, who by and large are the publishers of these games, happy. So you end up with this ridiculous scenario where the actual text of a review will be scathing and negative, but the review score at the end is 6 out of 10. Genuinely, at times, it feels like these reviews are written by one person and scored by another, and the writer is trying to convey their genuine feelings, while the score giver is trying to keep the advertisers happy. And while people openly acknowledge this and claim to hate the practice, I think it has a very real effect on how people engage with reviews. I think people see a 7 out of 10 and immediately think of those bad games that still got 6s or 7s from popular review outlets. So when they see somebody give Avowed a 7, their brain might even subconsciously go, oh, so this game actually sucks, you're just hesitant to give it a truly lower score. And that's an understandable impulse considering the true damage these websites have done, but the reality is no, I actually just think Avowed is a 7 out of 10. The biggest culprit of all, though, I think, is simply the social media age that we live in and the resultant ways that conversations take place. In 2008, to make reference to Force Unleashed again, the internet was starting to coalesce around a couple websites, but there was still a lot of diversity, and conversation happened across a variety of different platforms. It wasn't just the big three of Meta, Google, and Twitter. You were discussing how you felt about Force Unleashed on those websites for sure, but it was also happening on Star Wars message boards and chat rooms, or in the mail section of your favorite video game magazine, or in response to the review on X-Play. The conversation was spread out, and I think this helped a lot to prevent tribalism. The kind of bad faith arguments I've talked about happened back then too, but because of the decentralized nature of the conversation, it didn't have nearly the same impact. The idiots would be spread out. So if you were on a 2000s era message board talking about what you enjoyed in Force Unleashed, and some dummy waltzed into the conversation to call you all idiots for not playing Devil May Cry instead because of its clearly superior combination system, it really was easy to just ignore that person. They were just one guy in a conversation full of genuine discussion. Everyone would just dunk on him or ignore him and then move on. It's impossible for someone like that to dominate the conversation. But nowadays, the conversation is corralled into only a few different platforms, and those people aren't spread out anymore. So if you see an obviously silly argument like Avowed sucks because it doesn't have pickpocketing, which Skyrim had in 2011, the guy won't be alone anymore. 100 other people with that same opinion will see that comment and support it, and as a group they will be able to gas one another up about how Avowed is garbage and start going from video to video working together to spread the gospel. The reduction of different social media platforms has made it trivially easy for people with stupid takes to find one another and make conversation that doesn't align with their preconceived notions impossible to have. Like, think about any modern discourse within gaming, whether it's about feminism and political correctness ruining everything, or fandom specific stuff like Zelda fans complaining about the timeline and game director. You'll find all of this kind of stuff being brought up in these old 2000s era message boards as well, often in threads that had nothing to do with the things they're complaining about. But the difference is, it was always just like one or two guys, and it was so easy to tune them out. But the reduction of places to talk about gaming has caused all of these like-minded people to unite, and they're not just able to clog up conversation but hijack the narrative itself. It isn't just one angry guy yelling on the street corner anymore, they're now forming into angry mobs. Ultimately, I think the death of 7 out of 10 games is the result of a number of different factors. Part of it certainly can be attributed to generations growing up in the 24-hour news cycle, in an age of sensationalized news where outlets seek to evoke big feelings for the sake of creating conflict. Part of it is also because the 7 out of 10 score has been weaponized by certain websites to avoid having to give bad scores to bad games, and this has created negative word association. And of course, a big part of it is the nature of modern social media and the reduction of platforms for us to talk about this stuff on. The lack of diversity in platforms has created factionalism, and critiquing video games has become a team sport that you can win or lose. People don't want to lose the battle over Avowed's reception, so they're going to do everything in their power to ensure that people know it's a bad game, and the battlefield will be in the comments section of anybody who dares to say anything positive about it. This is all so stupid, isn't it? But like, is there anything we can actually do about it? Well, I think there is, to a small degree at least. A lot of this stuff is out of our control. We're not going to stop the 24-hour news cycle, but you can make small personal decisions to try and combat this nonsense. To start with, be sure to analyze your own behavior and make sure you aren't also partaking in emotionally charged discourse. I understand that it can be frustrating, angering, and even upsetting to see people vocalize criticism on something you love and maybe even have an emotional attachment to, but make sure that they're actually giving an opinion in bad faith before before treating it like a bad faith opinion. A game reviewer giving your favorite game a 7 out of 10 and supplying actual reasons for it is not bad faith. Some random chud calling it garbage for having a woman protagonist or whatever, despite having never played the game, is. The other big thing we can do is to try and promote the growth of a diversity of platforms for us to discuss these sorts of things on. Did you know that message boards are very much still around? Find one you like and go use it. Have some conversations about the things you care about in a smaller setting, away from the cesspools of modern social media. Go find a small news outlet or fan website and see what they have to say. The only reason a handful of tech conglomerates dominate the conversation is because we let them, and we don't have to. Something like YouTube or Twitter will never be replaced, and I'm not even really arguing that they should be, just that it would be healthier to have a wider range of places to talk about this stuff. Go do your part in promoting the diversification of the internet. Find another smaller YouTuber to support instead of getting your opinions from the same 6 guys. Go find a small, struggling blog and leave them some comments. Support the few remaining independent news outlets and physical magazines that we have left. Go subscribe to a zine. And above all else, start loudly talking about the 7 out of 10 media that you enjoy and be proud to give them a 7 out of 10 rating. We have to make it commonplace again for us to like a game without loving it, and the only way that'll happen is by talking about it. The real difficulty with that is that 0 out of 10 and 10 out of 10 experiences tend to be so much more memorable than 7 out of 10 experiences, but we need to start appreciating the important place that a 7 out of 10 game has to the industry. We all have 7 out of 10 games from our childhood that we remember very fondly, and we should talk about them more. Please tell me in the comments, what's a 7 out of 10 piece of media that you've enjoyed recently? For me personally, that's how I've been feeling about Dragon Ball Daima. I think the heights of it are very, very high. The fight scenes are incredible, and there's some interesting intrigue, but the pacing is pretty bad, and they badly wasted the potential of the new characters. I think Daima is pretty good, but not great. I think Tears of the Kingdom is a great game with some very real flaws, and I think Avowed is perfectly fine, but not incredible. None of that should upset you, and if it does, you have some work to do. I know this wasn't really a Zelda-centric video, but hey, I had these feelings on my chest for a while now, and I needed to get them out. And I found a way to relate it to Zelda, didn't I? As always, thanks for watching. Stay safe out there, because it's dangerous to go